Zach with Wingard Wearables. You're one of 12 special people who's going to watch this video to the end. And today's video is about our new product, an Oyster knife. But first, two announcements. Now, we are having a table at the Lehigh Valley Knife Show this Saturday, September 27th from 9 to 5 p.m. That's in Easton, Pennsylvania, this Saturday, September 27th. And we will have a table at Blade Show West in Salt Lake City, Utah on Saturday and Sunday, October 10th and 11th. So comment below if you'll be at either of those shows because we want to see you. Now, back to the Oyster knife. We did not know what to name this product. So we first went to AI and said, hey, what are some names for this? And all the name suggestions AI had were horrible. We then held a knife naming contest, and we want to thank you guys for all your contributions. We had over 300 name suggestions, and most of those were also horrible. So, there's all this talk about AI and, it's going to catch up to humans and it maybe kill them, that sort of thing. But fortunately, I'd say about 10% of the name suggestions we got were actually good. So when it comes to humans versus AI, and humans have AI beat when it comes to naming oyster knives. There's a little bit of hope for humanity. Now, let's go over some of the more amusing and promising names that you suggested. Po' boy, right? Isn't that like a sandwich that sometimes they put oysters on in Louisiana? Is that right? Okay. I went to New Orleans and had a po' boy one time, like decades ago. Aw shucks, that was one. The shell shocker, I like that one. The Helen Sheller. But I'm from Alabama, so I have to, that touches my homeland. Pain compliance, that's P-E-I-N. A little bit punny, going with an oyster variant. The shuck around and find out. Shuck and jive. And so many people suggested the clam jammer, which I do admit pairs well with our dick pic product lines, as far as names that are a little naughty, but I'm getting older and more modest at my age. So, the 36 suggestions for clam jammer, we didn't go with that one. And many of you suggested mother shucker, even though in the video I explicitly was like, hey, we aren't doing that. So, humans and AI, it's a little competition here. Going back to the names, the soul shucker, I like that one. Pearl clutcher, the mollusk mangler. Someone also suggested the mollusk molester, which was not a good name, but there was that. Shell splitter, oyster foister, I like that one. Get shucked, shuck in awe, the pearl persuader, the oysterizer, the shell shank, the pocket shucker. Really like that one since, it'll fit in your pocket. Grabby stabby, shell saber, pearl picker, slit slitter, Chuck Norris. Don't want to get sued by Chuck Norris, so no. The shuck hold, the shucky charm, little shucker, the shuck tuck. That's a good one. Pearl jam with jam having a B at the end, because you're jamming it in. Pocket poniard, I think I pronounced that correctly. Pokey thing. The concha, which is Latin for something also naughty, which we won't go with. The pearl tickler, the shuckless, the shuckazulu. I like that one. Shuck off, and finally, I'm gonna get you shucker. So out of those 300 names, that was like the top, around 10%. And the winning name was the ShellRaiser. Yes, thank you Tattoo Raptor on YouTube for suggesting the winning name. We saw that name, we looked at all the other wonderful names that y'all suggested and the many, many horrible names, and we realized ShellRaiser was the way to go. So Tattoo Raptor, please comment below, and also email us at B_edgy at wingardwearables.com with some message in the email that's tied to your YouTube comment, and we will figure out a way to send you your ShellRaiser. Now, we're getting into smaller products. Very minimalist fixed blades. The ShellRaiser is the first go at this for us. It is designed to work as an oyster knife and appear obviously as an oyster knife. So the blade and carry system easily tucks inside the waistband or your pocket. Allows very quick access. It can serve to open letters, boxes, that sort of thing. And it's got a hole, which is difficult to see on camera here, but that hole at the end of the clip enables you, when you slide this in, to attach your keychain to it. So you can have this, if you want open pocket, open key carry, you slide this into the pocket, and it's a keychain tool. So all this, in its slim, wholesome looking profile, make it appear as an oyster knife, not a murdered out tactical shiv that's marketed as an oyster knife. And it's a point driven tool, so you can pierce and propagate cuts. And the slimness of it allows you to slide into tight spaces, whether you're opening an oyster or you are just, for utility applications, having to reach and press into tight gaps. So, but it is an oyster knife. We did design it with this scallop motif on this. And the carry systems, let's stick this in so you can see, they have wholesome ocean vibes, some waves, some text, ocean blue, bay brown colors. They look like wholesome utility tools. And so when you're around the normies and they see you with your ShellRaiser, you can tell them it's an oyster knife and it will be accepted as that. Now, just a quick summary of the design process. I am not an oyster shucker. I consulted with a professional oyster shucker, and he had an oyster knife on him that he shared. As a big bulbous handle that he uses professionally, and it had a long sword-like blade for an oyster. As far as oyster knives go, it was long and thin. And I really liked the look of it, and he really liked, that was his favorite style of oyster knife. There's many different sizes and styles of oyster knife, but that's the one we chose. We just knew a big bulbous handle, although that's nice and ergonomic, would not be wearable. So what we did is took that sort of sword blade appealing profile, and I did hand sketches and like Kydex mock-ups and stuff, and figured out what we're calling the clip grip. So this is a two-dimensional cutout, out of ABL steel, 16th inch thick, and it is folded over into this ergonomic grip that can be function in like punch dagger or ice pick, or cinched up for working it into an oyster and opening it. So it is ergonomic. It allows for very deep pocket carry. Like as far as, when they talk about deep pocket carry sheaths, this is where it's resting on your pocket. You've got about a ½ inch of your sheath sticking out of the pocket. That's it. So that is a really deep carry for a pocket fixed blade. Now, getting it from like plastic prototype out of Kydex or 3D printing and into metal prototype turned out to be really tricky. Originally, we had hoped we could just hand forge it into this clip, but it is so thin and has such high surface area, it is losing heat so quickly, it would warp when it was unconstrained and being hand forged. So what we had to do was cold work it into this shape. We had to basically make dies, modify an electric log splitter into a press. There was a whole lot of trickiness on getting the right final dimensions, the gap for the clip, and also how far the clip had to fold over based on a flat cutout piece. It just took a lot of iterations. Now on the heat treatment, the high surface area helps you for getting up to temperature very quickly. We used aluminum plate for rapid air quench, and then 2 hours of temper, 400 degrees. This is ABL steel, heat treated to around 58 Rockwell C, which is kind of considered the optimum for toughness and hardness. And then it's sandblasted and ground with the edges almost sharp in a generous ricasso section so you can pinch up. Now, if you want a knife-like edge, it goes to an edge like an oyster knife, like it's almost sharp. It's a little bit sharper than a false edge, but it's not quite knife sharp like an oyster knife. If you want it sharper or you want it duller, like some oyster knives, some people prefer a duller one. Sharpening stones can touch this up either way really quick if you want, or hand file, that sort of thing, to get it sharper or duller, whatever your preference is. Now the carry system, the Sheath, very deep pocket carry with a clip grip. And it features 2 pocket catches that look like waves. You see this whole thing has a rolling wave aesthetics terminating to these cresting waves that, when you slide this in, the cresting waves rest in the clip. So your fabric material where you're carrying this inside the waistband or in your pocket is right here to be caught by these 2 pocket catching waves. The wave at the top is for retention in case you get bumped or bump into something. It'll retain the tool, but the entire sheath is flexible to easily, quickly draw it. And it's a very open design, so it's easy to clean. We went with 3D printing because Kydex, when you do a pocket wave, like pocket catch carry, winds up being really wide, and we wanted such a narrow tool, like it's so thin, we wanted the sheath to be very thin along it too. So we had to go 3-dimensional, with the pocket catches coming up. That required 3D printing, and if you're going to go with 3D printing, like, why make it just for utility? You might as well, completely exploit that unique manufacturing process and make it aesthetically pleasing. So we went through so many design iterations to get that dialed in so it had ocean-like vibes. We also have a hole here for a lanyard. It comes with a shot cord clamp tether, but if you prefer a different style cord or no tether at all, you can remove it. And yeah, they come in a bay brown color and ocean blue. These are printed out of ASA. So ASA is like a UV weather resistant ABS plastic. So it's a tough plastic, good performance, when you're carrying this, working with it outside, that sort of thing. And the last was just a final little touch. We put a Shakespeare quote on the base. So every surface of this is decorative that's exposed. And the quote says, "The world's mine oyster, which I with sword will open." That's from the Shakespeare play, where originally that was the quote that eventually became the phrase, "The world's your oyster." If you go to Google AI and say, hey, what's the world's your oyster mean? It's sort of like, hey, the world, the opportunity is in front of you to find that pearl. If you take a chance and open an oyster, that sort of thing. But the original meaning from the play in its context is more sinister. It's a criminal basically asking for money, and someone refuses to lend them money, and they say that quote. And the original metaphor means, if you don't provide me what I want, I will use force to take it. So yeah, oyster vibes. And the final thing was just some product packaging. I had some fun with the graphic design work there. So that's the work that goes into taking something from concept to product line into reality. Now the dimensions of this, in the carry system, it's about 7 3/4 inches long and under 1 inch high at the tallest section. The knife itself is about 7 inches long. The blade is 4 1/4 inches from tip to the scallop here, 1/16 inch thick, and about a 3-inch edge. And you have an 1.25 inch ricasso section. When you grip this in punch dagger grip, it's protruding about 4 1/4 inches. If you grip it in my hand, if you grip it in ice pick, that's about 3 1/3 inches. Now, for carry and access, this is narrow enough to slide in Molly Pal's loops, but it's primarily inside the waistband or pocket carry. Now, let's talk oysters. So, raw oysters, super simple, nutritious snack that has a little risk with it, right? You might injure yourself in your attempt to open the oyster, either with the oyster knife or the sharp edge of the shell. You might get deathly ill eating an oyster that's past its prime. Or you and a lady friend could be slurping down raw oysters with an evening of pleasures, and then you later have child support payments or find out you caught a venereal disease. These types of risks add to the spice of life. Now, oysters, very fun snack. I am not a professional oyster shucker. I'm not even an experienced oyster shucker. I consulted with a professional oyster shucker. Him and his crew out in Maryland will shuck over 1,000 oysters a day per person. So they're very experienced. And what I'm going to do is basically there's more than one way to open an oyster. I will be going over 2 techniques with the ShellRaiser. So the most common technique is through the hinge. There are probably hundreds of YouTube videos showing the technique of opening the oyster through the hinge. So we're going to be cutting to some video of me, who is not a professional oyster shucker, slowly opening oysters. All right, so there are 2 sides to the oyster, the cup side, the flat side. Cup side is down on the table, flat side up. Find the opening in the hinge, insert the tip, twist, and I twisted my ShellRaiser all the way over and wiggled it in to detach the oyster muscle on the flat side. And then you can just, cut the muscle on the inside of the cup and it's ready to slurp. Now you can use a specialty cutting board or folded up towel to press and conform around the oyster on a potentially slippery flat surface. I did that, and I also did the sort of armored up cut resistant gloves just so for clarity's purposes you can see what's actually going on. The towel tends to just cover everything up. Now when you go through the hinge, it is slower, requires more force, and is tougher on the knife. But if you do it right, the cup side is going to hold the oyster flesh and the juice. And a lot of people that slurp down raw oysters want the juice that goes with it. Or if you want to bake the oyster on the half shell in its own juice, again, you want to retain the juice. Now, that's the through the hinge technique. There's another technique through the front, and we're going to go over that too. Now, the through the front technique also starts with the oyster cup side down. You use the tip of the knife to create a hole through the overbite between the cup and flat side. Work that tip in and twist. When you see air bubbles, that's when you know you're at an effective depth. You twist and pop that hinge, and then you cut the muscle on the inside surface of the cup side. All right, and then leave the knife inserted to trap the oyster meat against the inside surface of the flat side and pry the hinge off. Now all you got to do is cut that little muscle, holding it onto the hinge side, and it is ready to slurp. Now, if you're a pro, you can just make that entry hole very quickly. This technique requires less force. If you go through the hinge, as I'm showing, oftentimes the oyster shell will structurally fail, and then that through the hinge technique becomes more difficult. So you go through the front. You try to find that gap in the overbite, work that tip in, twist it around, pop it open, again severing the muscle on the cup side. Leave the blade inserted, trapping it against that flat shell, and then you just pry it open. Through the front comes from the person I'm consulting with, professional oyster shucker. That's their preferred method. They are shucking at great quantity. It is definitely faster, requires less force than through the hinge. If you're shucking oysters just to slurp down the meat, you don't like the juice, you aren't baking them, that sort of thing, then this technique is viable. Also, if you're shucking oysters just to harvest the meat, to fry, that sort of thing, then this technique is really good. And also there are times when an oyster is difficult to get through the hinge. So if you master this technique, it's a handy thing to have in your back pocket. Now, ShellRaisers, we have made the first batch. They're on the site. The first batch is going for $85. That includes the ShellRaiser in-carry system with US shipping. and they are fully functional. That first batch, they look wonderful, but we have crisped up some of the aesthetics in the second batch, which has started. And the second batch will be going for 105. So I want to show you the difference between first batch. So this is a first batch ShellRaiser here. All right. And this is second batch. And the big differences is the bevel height is a little bit shorter on the second batch, and just the aesthetics are crisper. These are both very functional stout designs. If you're looking to get a ShellRaiser at the best deal, definitely get yours now. The second batch will be available later. Now, ShellRaiser, very minimalist metal design. If this is the first time you ever heard of Wingard Wearables, we also make other minimalist metal designs. This is our Quill multi-tool and our very popular Dick Pick multi-tool. Both all functional minimalist metal designs. So really thank you if you're one of the 12 special people who watched this video to the end. Be sure to share it so 13 will have watched it. And remember to be edgy.